The ICF Training and Technical Assistance team is honored to welcome you to this California Housing and Community Development training session offered through the Emergency Solutions Grant, Coronavirus Relief Consulting and Staffing Services contract. I'm Chris Pitcher from ICF, and I'll be hosting today's session. Today's training session is part of our community workshop series and is the second in the Equal Access Rule and LGBTQIA2S+ inclusivity session. It is my privilege to introduce today's first presenter, Chris Andrews. Chris.
Great, thank you so much, Chris. Welcome back, everyone who was with us last week. For those who are coming in to our first session today, welcome. We are so excited for you to be here with us for the next 90 minutes to be talking about the details of the Equal Access Rule and inclusivity in the LGBTQIA2S+ community. Next slide, Taylor. So this is our second in our open training within this training workshop series. Last week, we talked about anti-discrimination protections and how they apply to our work and to our clients and program participants. And today is session number 2. If you were not able to join for session number 1, or if you want to go back and look at it again, a recording of that will be posted. A recording of this training will also be posted, and we can make sure to get you details on where and how to get to those recordings. Next slide. Moving forward in July, we're going to continue this workshop series. We're going to break it down into 2 different tracks. Track 1 is targeting our frontline staff and supervisors and really kind of working on putting a lot of what we're talking about here and what we talked about last week into practice in your day-to-day work. Putting those policies into practice, how to do so, how to create and navigate inclusive practices and navigate nuance. And then finally, creating spaces for safety for everyone within our community. Track 2 is targeting directors and supervisors of programming and looking at how to incorporate the rules and requirements and the best practices within this topic into your program design and program implementation. You'll see those are throughout the latter half of July, and so hope you all will join for the sessions that work for you all. Next slide. Before we get started, I want to take a minute to introduce our team. I'm Chris Andrews, he, him pronouns. Today, joined by Rajni Shankar Brown, she, they pronouns, and Abby Miller, also she, they pronouns. And our 4th presenter, Karen Coel, she, they pronouns, is not here with us today, but she will be here with us during the workshop session next month. Next slide. To get started, and I see some of you already doing this, thank you. Please put your name, your pronouns, and your community in the chat box. And if you were with us last week, tell us one thing you've been thinking about. Since last week's session, we talked about a lot of different rules, a lot of different requirements. We talked a lot about how to think about anti-discrimination practices. If you weren't with us, let us know one thing that you're thinking about for today, something that you really want to dig into and dive into today. And we will make sure that we incorporate that either in today's session, and if we're not able to today, incorporate it into a workshop next month. So as you all are doing that, kind of keep typing that into the chat box. I see a number coming in, thank you. And we'll continue on, next slide. And we're going to start with a poll. I just want to know who's here today, kind of how you identify within your role within the homeless system. And we understand you, like many of us, likely wear different hats. So if you do feel like you wear 1 or 2 hats within the homeless system, just select what you think your role is that you're either representing today or what your primary job function is. And Taylor, if we can launch poll number 1.
Hold on, wrong poll. Sorry. I was looking at poll 2. There we go.
Great, thank you, Erin. We'll give folks you should have the poll popping up. And so please go ahead and fill that out.
I'm gonna give them just a few more seconds, Chris.
Great, thank you, Erin. So it looks like we have a number of different folks represented here. Frontline staff, a number of directors, administrators, folks working within coordinated entry, a few funders, and some folks who work elsewhere in the system. And if you want to share that in the chat, please do so. And next slide. We shared these group norms last week, and we will continue to share them kind of within every workshop and every session we do. We want to make sure that we are kind of all coming together in the same space and in the same mindset as we're talking kind of about the topics of this workshop and of this training. So I'm just going to walk through our group norms. Number one, we want to engage with the content and with each other. So that we are maximizing learning. If you haven't done so already, please close your email, put your phone down, be with us for the next 90 minutes. Share your thoughts, share your questions in the chat. We speak with positive intentions. In our presenting, that is our goal. In your chat, if you want to raise your hand and ask a question, please go ahead and make sure that you're speaking with positive intentions. And intentions don't always equal impact on others. So apologize when we make a mistake and acknowledge those mistakes that we make. But also assume that everyone here, both those of us kind of on the presenter table and everyone in the room is coming with good intentions until proven otherwise. And then finally, please ask questions. We want to learn from each other and from everyone in this space. So please ask questions. If it's a question you don't want to share publicly on the chat, you can message one of us directly. You can email it at a separate time. You can put it in the chat. There will be times when you can raise your hand and we can engage verbally. But if you do have questions, please use this time to share those. Next slide. So our agenda for today, we're going to go through 5 key topics. First is talking through identities and terminology. The second is impacts of queerphobia and transphobia. And just to preview for all of you, we will want to be hearing from you kind of during that session of something you learned, something you heard in that session that surprised you. So keep that in mind as we're talking through that session. The next element of the agenda is implementing the equal access rule. And we're going to be sharing a number of examples and discussing how can we as providers within the HOMO system respond better. And then the fourth item on the agenda is organizational policies and best practices. And we know you all are already doing a lot of great work. We have heard it from you in last session. We've heard it in other work in the ESG CV program. And we want to hear from you of what do you think you're doing well? What are you proud of? What are steps that you've taken this year, last year, or with the start of the CV program or in your regular programming that you're proud of from an equal access perspective? And then what do you feel that you need to do to improve your work. We are all continuing to push our agenda and push our work forward. And what do you feel like you need to be doing to continue to be taking those next steps? And then finally, we'll be sharing a number of resources. And again, we'll be making sure that we're sending out those links through the chat and making sure the resources that we talk about are posted. And so with that, I am going to turn it over to Abby Miller.
Thanks, Chris. Taylor, you can go to the next slide. Thank you. So we're going to kick off with an exploration of this very long set of acronyms, LGBTQIA2S+. If you can believe it, it does not even include, it includes a small fraction of the terms that the larger queer community uses to refer to ourselves. If you know these, chill for a second. If you don't know them, this is your moment to listen just for some basic 101 grounding. So we're going to be using these terms, and we all have to be very comfortable using them because you're going to use them in your practice. If you're not already, we're going to use them here to talk to each other. So it's important to make the right distinctions that we're talking about the same thing. So gender identity is one's innate identification as the gender that one knows themselves to be. That may or may not correspond to the sex that somebody is assigned at birth, meaning you're delivered, doctor, doula, midwife, whatever, they slap you and say, it's a boy, it's a girl, right? Well, gender may or may not match up with that. If it does, that means you're cisgender, cis meaning same. So no slippage between what you were assigned and what you know yourself to be. Transgender is when your gender that you know yourself to be is different than the one that someone assigned you at birth, and that quite likely is on your birth certificate. So gender identity is different than gender expression. Gender expression is how you communicate through visual, social, verbal cues, grooming, dress, mannerisms, the way you speak, social interactions. That's gender expression. The thing with gender expression is it gets into perceived gender identity, meaning that, not everybody knows. This is why we ask pronouns. This is why we ask for people's self-reported gender. Separately, sexual orientation is about the emotional or physical attraction to another person or people, and can be defined roughly by the gender of the people that you are emotionally or physically attracted to. So the L, lesbian, women identified who are attracted to other people who identify as women. Gay, usually man attracted to another man, but it's also used as kind of a global term. So I identify as queer, but also will sometimes refer to myself as gay, even though it's not a perfect fit, just sort of use different terms. Bisexual, it's kind of set up on a binary, either men or women, and then a newer term that is becoming more well-known, pansexual, meaning the gender does not really matter in terms of who somebody is attracted to. Queer, as I said, often serves as an overarching term that also has some political connotations to it, meaning that we need to, there's a sense of we need to bind ourselves together in some way. And queer often is a term that will be used to do that. It is worth noting that for older generations of my queer community, that term is not always desired and can be really triggering and traumatizing. So it depends on who you're talking to and how people self-identify, I think is the most important part. What else? Intersex is the I. We are going to watch a video in just a second. And Two-Spirit is an observance in a global term across multiple Indigenous communities that is actually a roll-up, not the best term, but a global sort of umbrella term that actually encompasses a lot of tribally specific terms, but meaning that people have two spirits, male and female, in them. So I think a lot of us have heard LGB, maybe a little fewer of us have heard the T, and I think even fewer have really spent time on the I or the 2S. So I have some videos queued up. Taylor, if you want to go to the next slide. That go through intersex and Two-Spirit. You can hit go on this. Oh, we have no sound. So Taylor, you have to be off mute.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Is the size okay, or would you rather me make it large?
I think it's great.
Raise your hands if you have testes. I'm Pigeon.
I'm Alice.
I'm Emily.
I'm Cypher.
And we are Intersexy.
Intersex describes a person who doesn't fit the typical definition of male or female.
I have XY chromosomes, but typical female genitalia.
I'm a girl who has testes and XY chromosomes.
I identify as a queer, gender non-conforming intersex person.
I identify as a Black intersex man.
Intersex is not new. It's been around since the beginning of human existence. I mean, there's probably even intersex dinosaurs, if you think about it.
Transgender has to deal with your gender identity, whereas intersex has to deal with your biological characteristics.
Often, intersex people get surgeries that they don't want, and transgender people have to fight for surgeries that they do want. They gave my mom the excuse that the internal testes were cancerous, that I would develop cancer.
They didn't even come up with an excuse, basically, in terms of a health-related reason. They instead just said it was about the appearance.
A lot of doctors are very uncomfortable with the idea that I have testes, and they're still trying to get them removed, but I'm perfectly healthy and there's nothing wrong with them.
They did a surgery to remove my testes and told my parents to take me home and just raise me as a girl, and I didn't find out about it myself until I was 12.
There aren't a lot of options, or medical providers don't explore other options. My mom would put me in dresses and she would be like, "Oh, aren't you so cute and you're so pretty?" And I would be like, "No, this is horrible." I was put on hormonal treatment, which consisted of estrogen and progesterone. I just wanted to belong. I wanted to fit in. I didn't want to be different. So even though I knew something felt amiss, I conformed. He was very condescending. He was like, "You intersex activists don't know what you're talking about."
It's difficult for intersex people to find each other because from an early age we're told not to talk about our bodies.
I did feel like I was the only one.
My doctors always told me there was nobody else like me, and so it just perpetuates a vicious cycle of shame and stigma that we can't break out of. I would tell another intersex person that you are worthy, you are lovable.
Your body is beautiful, you're beautiful.
Intersex people don't need to be fixed. There's nothing wrong with them.
I know you feel like you might not be able to get through this. I know you might have really dark thoughts, but I want you to know that meeting other intersex people and finding a community or a support group can be one of the most important aspects in your healing process. And we're out there, we're out here, we're here. And I just hope you can find us.
Thank you, Taylor. And you can go ahead with the second one. And just for folks who aren't watching the chat, Chris dropped both links in so you can watch them in full, both of the videos. Go ahead.
So, Two-Spirit is a contemporary English term that reflects gender and sexual diversity that exists in Turtle Island prior to European colonization. And that was disrupted with the imposition of foreign values, Christianity, religious institutions. And what happened was Two-Spirit people were suppressed and killed, and the teachings around that went underground to protect them. Whereas now it's I would say a very different environment for people who are growing up, but still very scary, I would say, for Two-Spirit trans youth in rural Alberta.
Thank you. Again, the video clips are in the chat. If any of what I just said or any of the folks in the videos is unclear to you, put it in the chat, what you'd like to hear more about, what you'd like to learn more about. We can either give you resources, make some time in here. If you don't want to send it to everybody, you can also do a direct message. In the meantime, I have one more slide before I turn this over to Rajni. Taylor, if you'll advance it. Thank you. So I wanted to show you the Williams Institute produces so much. They are part of UCLA's law school, and they conduct independent research on sexual orientation and gender identity, specifically as it applies to laws, policies. They're a wealth of information. So they've put together these statistics on the different states. And here you can see some facts that I wanted to point out. In California, on the left-hand side, this is just young people under the age of 18. Almost 2% are identifying as transgender. That is significantly higher than other age groups. So if you look on the bottom right age brackets, you can see percent of the total population who identifies as transgender. And while there are fewer young people than some of the older groups, certainly there's higher percentages of people identifying. And people who work with trans young people are not shy about the fact that social factors are impacting that, but it's also not a social phenomenon. Much like at different points in our history, when gay and lesbian folks have come out, they have come out in larger numbers when they felt safe, when we have felt safe. And as visibility increases to say, you are not a freak, you are not alone, there is nothing wrong with you. This part of your identity is valid. And look at these other folks who are also living out in their life. So young people are realizing earlier and easier that their gender is different than the one they were assigned. I think I've fallen in a lot of TikTok holes on this. It's an incredible treasure trove. And older adults report it being harder to come out. It threatens social stability, a lot of times economic stability, where young people are having this moment of, they can define themselves much earlier on and go on to lead a life that doesn't feel like it's covering up any of those pieces. So that's the last part of this lovely queer umbrella. And I will turn it over to, somebody just asked what's a TikTok hole? TikTok, the social media platform, meaning I fall into deep holes of just looking at video after video. So I will turn it over to Rajni to discuss queer and transphobia and its impacts.
Thank you so much, Abby. Yes, and the TikTok hole, I've been there before too. That can happen. Well, this is such important discussion today, and I'm just so grateful for us having this discussion. And I wanted to share a little bit of context as well as I talk. I'm the president of the National Coalition for the Homeless, and we are sifting through data even as we speak. And what we are talking about today is so critical when we think about equity and justice, but also even as we think about and honor the loss of so many precious lives. And I'll make those connections as we speak today as well. So queer phobia is a systemized discrimination or antagonism directed against queer or LGBTQ AAIP2+ persons. Again, you'll see many different acronyms that exist. I did put in the middle of this slide, kind of breaking down the acronym that I've used here with queer phobia, right? LGBTQ AAIP2+. What we know is that sexuality, there is a spectrum, gender, there is a spectrum. And so part of our work is also continuing to educate ourselves and our communities to make sure that we are honoring the authenticity and affirming the beautiful diversity among us. So we know that 50% of LGBTQ plus Americans say that they have been insulted or abused while playing, watching, or talking simply about sports. So this is just one side fact that I share. But what I want to kind of expound on here is that we continue to see overrepresentation in hate crimes, harassment, abuse, barriers to housing, justice, and shelter, increased mental health challenges and lack of access to public health resources, increased challenges in terms of physical health, and higher rates with suicide. There are lots of compounded intersecting issues here that are really important for us to think about as we talk about this, and for us to work actively to address and prevent in our communities. And this is where, of course, the equal access rule and additionally our agency can really make a difference. Now, if we think of queer phobia as an iceberg, here is kind of a visual for us to think about. And this is just an educational visual. There's a lot of great resources out for us to continue our education on this. This gives us a tip of the iceberg, right? Where people might say something that is hurtful, offensive, insulting, and then just say, it's just a joke, right? I'm just joking, I'm kidding. This happens a lot. But what we know is underlying that, people in power are making kind of anti-queer legislation on the other side of this. And so even these connections at the micro level have deep intersections to the macro level as well. Another example here is, you know, they're freaks, right? Just talking about how people who are perhaps trans or non-binary, making these kinds of remarks. Well, what we know again is queer individuals are often denied healthcare. Not only healthcare access, but culturally relevant and appropriate and healthcare that is deserved of everyone, that is a human right. The same thing for housing. And it is really a problem. In fact, when we think about our LGBTQIA+ two-spirit populations, we start to see really troubling numbers in our data. Right now, currently, right, we've continued to see, even when we talk about young adolescents and youth, I do a lot of work with youth, over 50% experiencing homelessness are queer, right, or embrace an identity and are LGBTQIA+. And this is very, very troubling. What we start to see is, again, this intersection of a lot of issues that start to pop up. One thing that we know is that, again, our individuals who are experiencing homelessness or housing instability who are LGBTQAAIP2+, have higher rates of mental health challenges, housing instability, and again, access even to get resources. And this is coming up in data over and over again. And there's racial equity connections here too, that we simply cannot ignore. An example being that nearly half of Indigenous LGBTQ plus youth and individuals have experienced homelessness or housing instability. And this is a disparity that is quite glaring when you look at white communities. The same for Black, Latina, Latino, Latinx, and also Asian American and Hawaiian and Pacific Islander, which often is not talked about. But when we talk about homelessness, I just want to make the connection that the disparities are huge. And we see this magnified in California, where it is 9 times higher in experiencing homelessness for Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders than white. And there is the intersection, again, of over half, reporting that they are LGBTQ AAIP2+. So these intersections begin really important as we do this work. Next slide. Thank you so much. So thinking about transphobia, transphobia is the fear, hatred, disbelief, or mistrust of people who are transgender, or thought to be transgender, or whose gender expression does not conform to traditional gender roles. Now, transphobia includes a myriad of different kinds of characteristics and actual practices. Some of these things that show up are negative attitudes and beliefs towards transgender individuals, an aversion to or prejudice against transgender individuals, irrational fears and misunderstanding. And I will add there also falsified myths that exist. We see this pop up in so many examples. An example now I will share is even thinking about the pushback for gender inclusive restrooms that continues to be really troubling, that we see institutionalized from shelters to schools to even higher education, where we're trying to make these practices and bring and advance inclusion and equity, but there's still a lot of resistance, right? A lot of transphobia. Disbelief or discounting preferred pronouns or gender identity, derogatory language, name calling, and then bullying, abuse, and even violence. I do want to share, because I think this is really important that we all realize collectively as we do this work, that when we think about homelessness, housing instability, our data is showing at a national level, but then we start to see certain states pop up, California, Florida, where I am situated also, dramatic percentage increase in the number of transgender individuals experiencing unsheltered homelessness. So much so, in fact, in terms of just experiencing homelessness since 2016, over a 90% increase. And the number of unsheltered homelessness has increased 113%, right? Now, of course, different data reports are going to show different numbers, but it's alarming, any of those numbers that you really are going to find and that you see. And behind every number and behind data are, of course, human lives, right? Our brothers and sisters and fellow human beings. So this is really important for us to really recognize. But the other thing I just want to share is we also have to be cognizant of the rising number of hate crimes that we continue to see and discrimination that we continue to see that has continued to grow against our LGBTQIAAP2+ communities, but also even as we start to zoom in and really look and identify specific communities, transphobia has continued to grow and even resulted in increased death in communities. Just look at the number of our lives, precious lives that we've lost because of trans violence, hate, abuse, harassment, and again, ultimately leading to death in so many cases, too many cases. So again, what we're talking about today, this is critical. I also shared a few things you'll see on this slide, some definitions. I know that the slides are going to be sent out to everybody after as a reference along with the recording, so you can revisit this, and please do share out in your own communities and workspaces. But again, what do we even mean by the word trans? Trans is an umbrella term used to describe a range of gender diverse individuals whose gender identity or gender expression differ in some way from the gender assumptions made at them at birth, the biological sex assigned to them as well. Now, this could be individuals who are seeking to transition from male to female or female to male through gender affirming treatments, but it also includes a much wider group of people who may not be seeking gender reassignment. People may identify as transsexual, transgender, transvestite or cross-dressing, gender, queer, non-binary, among many other gender diverse identities. And so we want to make sure that we are honoring what an individual prefers in terms of their pronouns, in terms of how they identify, right? That is really important as we think about building beloved community and equality, making sure that we are preventing discrimination. I added something here about our schools just to show how institutionalized transphobia unfortunately is. You can see here that in schools, and this is public schools, 75% of students who are identified as trans reported feeling unsafe. 51% reported pronouns and names being ignored. 65% were verbally harassed, and 12% reported being physically assaulted. Now, even as you see these heartbreaking numbers, we have to remember that they are often underestimated as well. Because for so many, we have many focus groups are running, and for many, they don't, there's too much trauma to even complete a survey, or they don't feel safe completing, even reporting. So there's a lot of compounded issues here. Next slide. So we have a brief poll here for everyone to take, just to see, and get a pulse on everybody and see how are our thoughts on this. How much more likely are LGBTQ, IAAP 2+ young people to be victims of a crime compared to hetero peers? Do you think it's 2 times more likely, 5 times more likely, 7 times more likely, or 10 times more likely? Can you bring up the poll?
Sorry, my computer froze for just a second. I'm trying to restart it.
That's okay, no worries. Thank you for being our Oz behind the screen and helping.
Here we go.
Awesome. So if everybody would just take a moment and respond to the poll. All right. And then I'm not seeing on my end. I wonder if Erin, Chris, could you help bring up the poll results for us? And I know Chris is going to talk us through it a little bit.
Yeah, I'm going to wait just a couple more seconds. We have about 50% responded so far. So I'm going to give people just a little bit more time. All right, here we go.
I didn't see it pop up on my end, but I'm glad it looks like people are getting it. So that's awesome. Okay.
Great, thanks, Rashmi. So it looks like the numbers are fairly split between 5 times, 7 times, and 10 times from all of our participants.
Fantastic. So Chris, do you want to give us the correct answer on this?
Sure. So the correct answer is 7 times more likely.
7 times. Thank you, Chris. I just, I want to pause for a moment. 7 times more likely. And what I want to share here is when we think about this, it shows, right, not only just in terms of thinking about the pain, the anguish, right, of the crimes itself, but the institutional hierarchies of power. How heterosexism, right, heterosexuality is institutionalized power. So when it is combined with phobias and prejudice, and you have power linked, you start to see the results of violence. And even it's not just harassment and physical abuse, but again, we even start to see disproportionality in terms of hate crimes. And this also, again, I'm going to make the intersection for us, also intersecting with people experiencing homelessness. There's a deep intersection there as well. Thank you. Can you do the next slide? So we have many realities facing trans and queer young people. These are some of those realities that I think are so important for us to consider. But again, even thinking about how the recent number of trans and non-binary people have been murdered at record highs. Right now, we're seeing 1 in 4 trans individuals assaulted, and race is deeply connected. Again, we start to see intersections with disproportionate number of Black trans women specifically, but also Indigenous, really, really disproportionate. And there's trauma with misgendering and practices that have not been supportive in terms of inclusive practices, such as dead naming, where, and this is a governmental practice and it's very hard. We have to understand, I am working in a community now where we have trans women of color living in poverty, and they have shared how hard it is, right? Because there are so many barriers to even obtain required documentation, to make changes, to have to pay fees to agencies, and ultimately this kind of misgendering, not being able to be named and identified correctly, it also increases high harassment, violence, systemic issues such as racism, housing and food insecurity, homelessness, and criminalization. So this is very, very serious. And you see a lot of statistics here that are really, really alarming, right? Again, the risk of homelessness, look, LGBTQ, IAAP2+, more than 1 in 4 thrown out of their homes. 62% attempted suicide. 7 times, that is the one we just took the poll on, victims of a crime. 54% experience abuse in their family. And I'm going to add on here our data at the National Coalition for the Homeless that we're doing. We're also seeing abuse in shelters. So even perpetuated trauma, right? Where you have abuse from your family, you're now trying to get access to get housing services, and continued abuse and discrimination. And then you start to see, again, here are numbers for risks with transgender youth, 8 times more likely to attempt suicide. 78% of transgender students grades K through 12 reporting harsh harassment, 35% physical assault, 12% reporting sexual violence, 15% of transgender students leaving school, and half of those leaving school report experiencing homelessness. So these intersectional connections are so important for us to see. We do have the link there if you want to go and learn more and see the report. Another report that I think is really great, and I'll drop it in our chat in a little bit here when I change speaking roles, but the Trevor report that just came out in 2022 really has data that I think we all need to contemplate, be cognizant of, amplify, and address urgently as we do this work. Next slide.
So she's not being negative on this?
What's that? So you start to see the realities here facing adults, trans, and queer individuals, right? And again, look at these numbers, these statistics, and remember behind these percentages are human lives. Again, you can go to the link to get more information. And I think part of this work, again, is really looking at too, how do we make sure our practices are inclusive? This is vital, from everything from policies, our handbooks, our practices, our language that we are using. And this takes work. And it's not just a one-time kind of evaluation, it's ongoing work to have to reflect, to tackle bias that we individually and collectively have, and then to make sure our practices, our structures, our systems move towards inclusion, making sure that all individuals have human rights honored, dignity honored, love, know that we, all of us belong. Really important. Next slide. Oppression is layered and it is intersectional. I bring this up because often, historically, even as we've done equity, justice work, we've operated in silos and not really looked at the tangled intersections that are imperative to our work. You can see here, people experiencing homelessness disproportionately, when you start to look at the number of individuals who are Black and the percentage experiencing homelessness, it is huge in our nation. You even start to look at evictions that are happening, and you start to see the intersection where over 80% are Black women. And also you start to see large percentage of LGBTQIA P2+. And here, look at the general population, only 13%, but 40%. And in fact, in some ways we're running reports, it's far over 40. Right? And the same here, where I want to pause, what we're seeing here is these disparities also for other communities of color, Indigenous, especially in California, you see many tribal nations, Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander, and even Asian, which often because of the small population don't get misrepresented or left out of conversations altogether. And in California, you have to think about communities like the Hmong community. And again, we start to see even cultural barriers with LGBTQIA 2+, right? In terms of being able to come out safely, being able to have access. And I like Tommy has brought up in the chat box, I'm just seeing this, right? In terms of connections to religious upbringing as well. So even thinking about those connections when we think about intersections. Thank you for that, Tommy. Next slide. Again, foster care, general population, you start to see again, even when we look at foster care, trans youth are highly represented in foster care, also experience increased abuse, harassment, lots of painful stories and experiences working with youth that we really see. I'm going to pause for a second and I want to find out, Abby, am I to keep going or what slide? Remind me, I'll get passionate and keep talking. So I just want to make sure.
Yeah, you have another couple. You have a poll. I would say let's skip the poll and just do the 2 slides following. Be great.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much. So we'll skip the poll, but you all can look at that and we'll make sure you have the response, the correct response as well. Next slide. And Veronica, thank you for your comment. I'm just seeing that. And what you're sharing, right, with our tribal nations, indigenous, the disparities are huge. Again, when we look at people experiencing homelessness, and also disparities when we intersect that with LGBTQ IAAP 2 Spirit plus. So thank you for that connection. Yeah, 10 times. Right? So incarceration as well, this even ties into criminalization. So here we have, LBQ women is listed here, lesbian, bisexual, and queer, but again, a wide spectrum. And Abby just put it in the chat as well. Thank you, Abby. Next slide. So this goes into action. This is really important as we think about equality, as we think about equity, which is necessary for equality to even manifest. We have to, again, look at what is going on and have a realistic understanding of the intersectional and quite devastating issues that we continue to see. The reported murders of transgender individuals, again, has continued to rise. 1 in 4 trans individuals who are experiencing homelessness, in fact, not only share being assaulted verbally, but also physically. And we even start to again see murder and death. It is hard for me, honestly, to even talk through this without getting emotional, right? Feeling and knowing the loss of so many precious lives that have been gone too soon because of systemic violence, discrimination, hate, which we must all actively stop. When we start to look at the intersections and root causes, we start to see racism, sexism. These intersections are vital for us to understand. Discrimination limits opportunity. Education, employment, healthcare, housing, public accommodation. When you look at sexism, you start to see mismatched legal ID, homelessness, intimate partner violence, health disparities, poverty, engagement in terms of sex work and sex trafficking. Sex trafficking, again, disproportionately, the number, especially of youth, I do a lot of work with youth, LGBTQ IAAP 2+ and transgender youth, disproportionately, when we start to talk about what is happening with sex trafficking. And even, I just want to point out, for many of us in our hearts and minds right now, we're thinking about reproductive rights and justice as well with all that's going on in our nation. And we cannot center, even as we think about reproductive rights, we have to center reproductive justice, which includes centering queer and trans liberation. There are clear, vital connections between all of this. Again, why I'm so grateful that we are pausing today to focus on this important topic. Now, here you're going to find some different ways for all of us to stop transphobia. And really, these also apply to stopping queerphobia, demonstrating trust, listening, respecting pronouns, identities, individuals, practicing kindness, compassion, empathy, and something which I'll share, radical empathy. Great book. If you haven't read Isabel Wilkerson's book, Caste, The Origins of Our Discontent, it's a really great book. The audiobook is wonderful as well. But she describes the term radical empathy, where empathy is not just putting ourselves in someone's shoes, because sometimes we can't. We may have never experienced anything close to that, but we can all listen with openness. We can all make sure that we learn, take the time to learn, and to honor the dignity of others. Being appropriate, right? And you saw this come up in the video clips played earlier that Abby shared. Doing our homework. And I'll go ahead and in a second when I switch over speakers to someone else, I'm going to put a few resources in our chat, including that book. So I'll definitely share that. And then doing our homework and not tolerating disrespect. Language hurts, but it also can lead to violence, and it shapes systemic structural practices. Becoming an advocate. This is huge, and we can all do that in our work every day. We can become an advocate, learn anti-sexist, heterosexist practices to advance inclusion and equity. And we'll share more resources as well. And we're also, this is a series. So my hope is that all of us will continue to wrestle with this and continue to dialogue and support each other as we continue to grow and continue to do this important work together. Queer anthropologist who in primary documents, she really was such a change maker. Her name is Margaret Mead. And she actually has a beautiful quotation: never doubt that a small group of committed individuals can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. We are committed individuals coming together, and we must continue to push and bend the arc towards justice. Namaste. Next slide.
Thank you, Rajni. Oh, can you go back like 4 slides? Okay, there we go. Rajni, thank you. I want to take a minute to just remember myself why we are here, why the equal access rule exists, but also that this isn't about, it's never just about regulations or laws or policies. It is 100% the human beings behind it and the dignity and humanity that they and we deserve to be afforded as a right, not a privilege. So HUD's equal access rule took aim at gender identity, marital status, and sexual orientation when it was created in 2012. Now, the reason that it was created is because at the time, the Fair Housing Act, of course, has, and other civil rights laws have sex-based discrimination prohibited, but it was not being interpreted by the courts as covering sexual minorities, which is anybody who doesn't identify as straight. I'll probably use that term multiple times, so I'll just explain it. Sexual minorities and folks with gender identities that are not cisgender. And also couples, regardless of gender or sexual orientation, who weren't legally married and therefore being turned away. So all 3 of these groups were identified as being at risk because the Fair Housing Act and other civil rights laws were not being interpreted to cover these groups. So it was created in 2012 for that purpose. And In 2012, as often happens with government programs, they were not quite ready to say how to handle sex segregated facilities. So the sex segregated facility guidance and then subsequent law came in 2016, and it really is just focused on the sex segregated spaces that are part of the ESG, COC program, but also all of the others. Basically, anything that HUD funds is covered under this. Anything that HUD funds and is sex segregated facility. So it says that somebody must be admitted based on their self-reported gender identity. That means it does not matter what IDs or birth certificates or medical records say. What matters is somebody's self-reported gender identity, because the only way that you can know someone's gender identity is to ask for it. It is not something that you can visibly see, and certainly not see on IDs often. So it also says you cannot ask intrusive questions. You cannot require proof, quote unquote, of gender identity. And then the last two pieces are really administrative, that providers, projects are required to have policies and procedures that reflect these requirements. So if monitored, that anyone would be able to see, okay, you have policies and procedures. And then that when privacy concerns come up, that you're taking non-discriminatory steps. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. So we can just go to the next slide. So now I'm going to talk about these little elements. From 2012 to 2016, there was also another change that I'll just highlight briefly. The definition of sexual orientation was changed, and that may seem like, why? Why does that even matter? It was updated to match the Office of Personnel Management for the United States, which is really like the umbrella organization that sets a lot of policy that other federal agencies follow. So it was obviously to bring it in line with that. But the important thing is that it really opened up the definition of sexual orientation. Now this matters when you think about enforcing requirements. So the first one said homo, hetero, bisexuality. That's it. I mean, you've already heard many other terms here today and probably know of other terms and identify with other terms. So updating these definitions has an important role in expanding the circle of who's part of a protection. So I want to talk about privacy concerns. Next slide. So in the original 2012 rule, it said that you can have a written case-by-case determination on whether an alternative accommodation should be provided to somebody who identifies as transgender in instances where it would ensure health and safety. Definitely a right-headed, right-intentioned policy, but was open for rampant misuse due to any number of biases that somebody has. Either the presence of a trans person in our program is inherently a health and safety violation. We've heard that, or a health and safety risk. The assertion that we can't keep this person safe is raised a lot. Well, it was taken out for the 2016 rule. And in its place is this requirement that non-discriminatory steps that are necessary and appropriate have to be taken. And it changed the focus from health and safety exceptions for trans people to say anybody in this facility who has privacy concerns, not safety, privacy concerns, can raise them. And if the facility is able to accommodate, then they accommodate. Now, this might not make a lot of sense because it feels like it's moving away from focus on people who identify as trans, but really it is about saying trans and cisgender clients alike must have the same set of rights afforded to them. And so if we are going to say that accommodations are made, they need to be made for anybody who has one. It also has the effect of then not focusing only on people identifying as trans. And so then by overly focusing, ending up isolating, segregating, or otherwise keeping trans clients outside of the normal services that everybody else gets. And when I say normal, I mean usual daily business. So this means if somebody doesn't want to shower with everybody else, if you have pit showers, that means, yes, we can set up a schedule and we can do it for anyone. So it doesn't have this effect of isolating and segregating just people who identify as trans. The next slide, please. So I talked a little bit about this already, actual versus perceived. This is, I will just talk about this for one more second. Self-reported gender identity is the law, is the regulation in this case. Perception is, I mean, by definition, what I see through my eyes is my perception. My eyes as filtered by my own biases and everything else going on in my mind, my social milieu that I live in. So whatever my perception is of you is not accurate because it's not your own understanding. And so that's the difference, which is why the rule is very clear about self-reported gender identity. Can you go to the next slide? Before you hit play on this, I just want to say this is a medical setting, this scenario, but it is a very common one that a lot of us encounter. So we're going to watch it and then talk a bit about how we respond better.
Josephine Ramirez. Josephine Ramirez. Can I help you?
Yeah, you called Josephine Ramirez?
Yes.
That's me. I go by Joe, so I'd prefer to be called Joe.
Really? Excuse me, I'm sorry, there must be some mistake. You signed in as Joe, but I have Josephine written down in my book. I'm sure we can fix this problem. Why don't you give me your ID and your health insurance card?
Yeah, I have all the forms.
Oh, you downloaded them from our website?
Yeah.
Okay. Is this your legal name? Okay. We will be using your legal name in the medical records. Okay, just so you know. And I'll talk to the office administrator and see if we can't fix this. Why don't you just go ahead and have a...
This clip gives me the shivers every time. Not only have I been in this situation, I have accompanied friends, partners who've gone through the same thing. So if you are, I'm looking at the time and I'm realizing we're not going to have time to have a real conversation here. But put things in the chat if you want to respond to this. And I will just say, because of our time, the community workshops, we are going to do a lot of practice. We're going to do a lot of discussion. So this will all be here for us to really dig into and think about how we can do better. Okay, so please put things in the chat. I apologize that we are not going to be able to really talk about it. But if you go to the next slide, I will talk a little bit about, you know, IDs and birth certificates. So 500,000 trans adults do not have an ID with the correct gender marker, which means every time somebody goes to any one of these institutions, this is a situation that Maybe it will happen, maybe it won't, but you're always tense and waiting for it to happen. And I think it's a very clear reason why IDs and other records get in the way of people listening and observing and actually seeing the person in front of them. So if you look at the statistics below this, 500,000 adults without an ID, you can see the impact of state policies. So of states with policy barriers that are quite low, I will put that in quotes, lower than others, you see twice the number of people are able to get driver's licenses and birth certificates corrected. But look at how low these percents are on the birth certificates and the IDs. 16% of people have been able to correct their birth certificate. So this is also a topic that we're going to be going into in the workshops about how you, we as a collective, as providers, can use the moment of collecting vital records to support people and make that the moment when they don't have to have that scenario happen again of legal name not being the same as actual name. If you go forward, so we are going to skip a whole set of slides that are absolutely going to be in the community workshops. One more. Thank you. This is the last piece that I want to talk about that is, and this is an amalgam of the COC rule, the ESG rule, and the equal access rule. And I'm going to weave them together here as I talk about this. I am sure that everybody on this call has heard you cannot separate families, involuntary family separation. Both the ESG and the COC rules disallow that. That means that the age and gender of children cannot be a basis for denying or removing services or a slot in a facility. But it also, there's another element here. The Equal Access Rule in 2012 defined family in a much more expansive way, similar to the 2016 update on sexual orientation. And with that expansive definition of family, it means that in the COC and ESG programs, as it applies to them, that heads of household also cannot be turned away, denied service or a slot in a shelter because of gender. So this, in very concrete terms, means any grouping of adults or a single adult who identifies as a man with minor children cannot be turned away from family facilities. And in a very pithy nutshell, if you serve any families with children, you are required to serve all families with children. In our national data, we know that about 10% of families are male-headed households. So that is not insignificant, certainly small, but not insignificant. Okay. I think with that, I am going to turn this to Chris, and I'm going to catch up on this chat because it looks like great things have been happening.
Yeah, thank you, Abby, and thank you, Rajni, for kind of sharing both of your sections, and thank you, everyone, sharing thoughts in the chat. It's really nice to see so much dialogue taking place there. If we can go to the next slide. We want to take a few minutes kind of as we close out today's session to kind of bring it, the discussion back to the projects and the work that you all are doing day in and day out. And as I said in the agenda, we want to both focus on what you all are doing that you're proud of, what you're doing that has been an effective step, an effective tool, an effective policy, and also talk about where there's room for growth. But I first want to to take a minute here and have folks share in the chat. If you'd like to share, we might be able to take kind of one or two hands raising of just hearing what you've done that you think has made your project better, more inclusive, and a safer space for kind of everyone whom you're serving. Is it through policies? Is it through staff training? Is it through creating a culture of respect? Is it establishing who the providers are and the support network with whom you work? If we go to the next slide, a few thoughts coming in. There are a number of best practices that you can engage in. And as we were thinking about today's session, wanted to flag just a few that can be steps that you can start to take forward. And number one is continuing what we're doing here, and taking the discussion, the dialogue, taking the content that we've used. By all means, please borrow it, steal it, take it, do what you need to do. To have training for staff, volunteers, contractors, and anyone else kind of interacting with your program. Promoting the inclusion of pronouns through introductions, through email signatures, in any form, creating the opportunity and the space to welcome anyone with an acknowledgement of pronouns. Reiterate and reiterate again your commitment to creating safe and affirming spaces. This is done kind of through your policies. It is done through how you're implementing your program. It is done through how you welcome and introduce anyone into your space and your facility. And that can be done with signage kind of in the next best practice, indicating what that, how safe that space is. And that is, it is an inclusive space. Creating safe access to restrooms, and I think there's been a lot of discussion kind of in sessions similar to this around gender neutral restrooms, and they are fabulous to have for anyone who does need additional privacy. But kind of in building off of what both Abby and Rajni were talking about, is not requiring anyone to use those bathrooms. It becomes our choice, my choice, your choice to identify what bathroom you would like to be using. If we could go to the next slide. We do want to do one quick poll. We would like to hear from you. Where do you believe your program has the most room for improvement? And I understand it may feel hard to pick one. You may want to say all of the above. If you feel like there is more than one that you have room for improvement, put it into the chat. But this will really help in our work in making sure that we're designing and structuring the workshops to meet where and how you all want to be improving your program. And I'm seeing so much chat, and I can't keep up with it, but I'm seeing Rajni and Abby are responding. So thank you all for sharing your thoughts, your ideas, what you all are doing. All right. And here on our poll, I understand kind of so many of you want to learn everything. And I think, you know, we agree there's so much to talk about. And then kind of digging in a little bit further, more responsive employee standards, making physical spaces more inviting and responsive. And I think that is always, I think, a great opportunity when there is also an influx of funding that can help with some of those improvements. And then increasing volunteer and contractor comfort. We have just a few minutes. I know there is a lot of content to be shared in this session. We have a number of resources that we are going to make sure get sent out to everybody to help. I know we put a lot in the chat, but we've got more to share with you, and hopefully we'll help you all kind of continue in your thoughts and your thinking on the topics today. But before we talk through where we're headed next, I do want to take a minute to open it up for questions or any comments that anyone wants to share. I know, Abby, you were just looking at the chat. Any questions or anything that you want to bring up or highlight?
Let me look. I did put some in. So from earlier, from the prompt of, you know, what are folks thinking about from last week? We had somebody say they want to understand how to convey early on in the admission or intake process that it's a safe space to express who you are. Let's see, what else? Some folks considering signage for bathrooms. Yeah, I think that's what I have. So what else do folks need to improve your work? Is it
I'd love to hear from the 37% who said everything. If you could pick one thing, what would it be? You know, is it guidelines? Is it creating safe space? Is it developing training content? I know it's hard to pick. I too would have picked everything. Teddy, you share kind of nonprofit provider board training. I think that's a really, you know, helpful piece to acknowledge, right? That I think as we think about creating inclusive spaces and safe spaces, is that that training and that engagement is both going kind of up, kind of, and making sure that, you know, decision makers and board members are on board and with you, you know, as well as going kind of down all the way to making sure that is the process that you're carrying for every individual. Rajni, it looks like you had a comment or a point.
Yeah, I just wanted to share. So I think Miriam, I want to thank you. Miriam had just chatted me, but you know, there are lots of best practices when we look at the horror in a lot of what we shared today in terms of data, statistics, realities that are so daunting. I know we kind of briefly covered some best practices, but I think there's a few people have actually asked, you know, can we go more in depth into some of those best practices, right? And what does that look like and feel like? And how do we go about doing that? And so I think that would be great. You know, I think I'll have to, obviously Abby is our leader here and Chris, but I'll check with them. But I think it would be great for us to do a session, right? A little more in depth and giving some examples of those best practices and what they look like. And so I would love to do that for you all. And there's some good resources too we can assemble and share out.
Yes, I think, you know, for the workshops, we are planning to use, we're going to use TikTok. We will have the videos, but also role play with each other, because it's always nice to practice with people where there's a shared understanding of we're here to practice, rather than having that be in the moment, and then, you know, messing it up, not just for you, but for somebody else. Yep.
And it looks like more comments on training. Thank you, Sonia. Miriam, I really appreciate that you're bringing back the data points that Rajni shared. I think for me, when I saw those, those numbers just jumped out and are just such, when you think about kind of that magnitude, it really drills home kind of how much needs to be done and what continues to be done in so many different ways.
Yeah, and I think it'll be good. We can, I'm just thinking out loud here, but, share a lot of those best practices and some really good examples too, because even as daunting as all of this is, there are some good examples that are filled with embodiment of hope, right? That are doing really well in pushing and making change. And so we can definitely uplift to that and talk about how do we adapt best practices too. And how do we also go about, I had kind of private chatted actually Chris earlier. He had shared about his dentist's office changing forms. And it's been great at the university I work with. We've been able to now change all our online systems and have students be able to share their pronouns and gender. And there's still a long way to go in terms of everybody honoring that as well, though, right? So we still see where certain faculty may not honor that. And, but even within all those processes, even another thing I think it's important to talk about is how do we continue to advocate even in the face of resistance, right? That we will tend to see sometimes with this work, but there are strategies for that as well as we think about mobilizing and advocating. So I'm already excited for us to dive into that. This is great.
Me too. And with that, we are going to you'll see some slides skipping by here as we head to our next session slide. All of these are going to be posted. We have links to all of the videos. I saw some questions in the chat about that. There's something here for everyone, and also a where can I file a complaint, because we always need to know that. Sorry, you can keep going though, Aaron. I was just referencing them as they were going by. Next sessions. So starting July 13th, and July 14th, we are going to have the 13th is a frontline staff workshop. And the other one is more geared towards supervisors and directors or people who are making larger programmatic decisions. So whichever one you find yourself slotted into or that would be more appropriate for you, attend. If they're both appropriate, feel free to attend both. It will be unique content. And I believe with that, Aaron, it is back to you, just with a big thank you for my, my lovely co-presenting community and all of you.
Thanks, Abby. Taylor, you can go to the last slide if you like. Thank you. So as usual, when we close these out, I just wanted to say thank you all for attending our California HCD community workshop that's offered through our Emergency Solutions Grant Coronavirus Relief Consulting and Staffing Services contract. You will be getting more information on the next community workshop series session, so keep a lookout for that. And a 3-question survey will pop up as soon as we end this meeting. So please provide your feedback so we can ensure that these sessions are as useful as possible for you. Thank you all so much and hope you have a wonderful day and a nice long holiday weekend.